I never imagined that my husband would kick me out of the house because I met with his lover. Even more shocking, I found myself in an ambulance escorting my lover to the hospital after he was nearly beaten to a pulp by my husband. What kind of love and hate are intertwined here? Welcome to the Love and Betrayed Love channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. My father was seriously hurt when he tried to confront my husband about kicking me out of the house. Even in my darkest fears, I never imagined myself sitting in an ambulance escorting my husband to the hospital after he nearly broke all of his bones. My name is Isabella, and I've been married to Nathan for 5 years now. We live in Detroit, Michigan. Despite our 5-year marriage, I never dreamed my husband could be as aggressive as he was 2 weeks ago. I'm even afraid of going to beg him, since I don't want to confront him honestly. Our marriage wasn't always this nasty. Our marriage began happily and respectfully, but not all wonderful things continue forever. Nathan and I have been great friends for years and we've been through some bad times together, but after time the sour flavor became apparent. We have 2 children together, a boy and a girl, and they currently do not live with either of us. Things had gotten so bad that our parents urged that the children not stay with either of us. Nathan is so enraged that his parents do not want their children to see him that way. As for me, I am not in the correct emotional state to visit my children. So after delivering my second child 2 years ago, Nathan and I began having severe disagreements. We disagreed frequently and about a variety of topics. Our disagreements began when I became insecure about his employment. I dreaded seeing him go to work, knowing full well that he had co-workers. I understand how childish that sounds, but it is the reality. His female colleagues are attractive and intelligent. I despised the fact that I couldn't pursue the same professional aspirations as they did. I'm a housewife with little college education, so I felt he needed to stop working and stay at home with me to raise the kids. I know it's immature to say this, but I didn't want him to quit his work completely. I simply wanted him to leave, so I could feel better. But Nathan maintained that he needed to work to provide for our children at home, and that taking a leave was unnecessary. After his father entered VED, we settled things and quit arguing. Things returned to normal and disputes abated, but victory was fleeting. Eventually, the devil chose to test my devotion to my husband, and I failed miserably. 1 year ago, I went to Alabama for my best friend's wedding. Flying from Detroit to Alabama takes nearly 14 hours. That is literally 1 day's journey. Nathan disliked the thought of his wife leaving her 2 toddlers behind and flying all the way to Alabama for a 1-week wedding. He insisted that I could only travel if I brought my 1-year-old with me. I refused to do what he said, insisting that he'd take care of her himself. It made no sense to me that he couldn't take on that job for just 1 week. I had been doing the same thing for years. I left for Alabama without telling him, and I left our children behind. I am not a bad mommy. I've just spotted a break. Besides, I didn't understand why it was such a huge thing for him to inconvenience himself for 1 week. He said he had to go to work and couldn't take the kids with him, but I didn't mind. In any case, being a housewife is not a joke. I had to make sacrifices, so I assumed he had to do the same. The wedding in Alabama was the toughest challenge of my marriage. I was a married lady in a strange setting, 14 hours away from my husband alone, with my thoughts and conscience what might go wrong. Right, everything went wrong. I'm no saint, and I understood that the instant I saw the men in Alabama, they were young, be eager to socialize, single or not. Of course I knew I had a husband, but the temptation was too great for even one person to resist a cocktail party. 3 nights before the wedding made me lose my morality. A guy named Derek agreed to be my date for the night for the record. I tried to deny him the opportunity, but he persisted and I became drawn to his perseverance. I knew being close to Derek would cause problems, but the problems were hidden under His seductive stare and attractive figure. Derek was a major temptation that I failed to overcome. He had a nice grin and a seductive attitude, yet he never stopped crossing the boundary and touching me improperly. I can't blame Derek entirely, because I was also encouraging him and testing the waters. I told him I was unmarried and carried my wedding band in my luggage. I even removed the picture of Nathan and my kids from my home screensaver. I wanted to come across as a single woman. That's how badly I fell for him. I didn't even want him to know I had children. Many people may believe what I did was wrong, and I agree, but not everyone can resist the temptation that is constantly placed in front of them. I lacked self-control with Derek and made no effort to resist him. Derek is astute and he played his cards properly. He saw how thrilled I became when he was near and he took advantage of it. For me, it was more than just lust. It was the fact that I saw someone new in a relationship, with no history or misunderstandings. It was different than being married with children and responsibilities. I finally understood why Nathan so desperately wanted me to take the kids with me. My children would have reminded me of my responsibilities as a mother and wife, but since they were nowhere to be found, it was easy to forget. I was married with children except for my best friend and her husband. No one knew I was there. She was too preoccupied with her wedding to realize that I was going to commit adultery. Derek loved playing dangerous games and I didn't stop him. He'd murmur stuff in my ear and I'd giggle like a fool. I had kissed Derek at least 3 times before the cocktail party ended. I figured Derek would invite me to his room, and I was not mistaken. I consented without hesitation and entered his room. Even to this day, I would acknowledge Derek's wonderful mouth. He has a way with words that may confuse people and cause them to do things they would not normally do right now. I despise Derek, since it is his fault. I've shown my husband's worst side, but it's a story for El Lat. Later that night, Derek and I started talking and he said a lot of nice things to me. He went so far as to call me the most gorgeous woman he'd ever seen. Normally I don't get swayed by such comments, but on that particular day there was nothing I could do. Derek thoroughly manipulated me and I shamefully fell for it. We started kissing when we finished talking, and just like that I lost my self-control and slept with him. The following morning I shamelessly bathed with him and ate breakfast in his room. In fact, I did everything with him that day, including skipping my best friend's breakfast with us as bridesmaids. I was too smitten with Derek to attend brunch. I didn't want the wedding to end, since it meant returning to reality and facing my spouse and children. I knew I'd feel guilty, but it didn't stop me from sleeping with Derek for the remainder of the trip. I even moved from my hotel room to his, thinking it would be simpler to reach him. That way I became a full wife to a man I had only met for a week. Derek promised me on the ladies' day of the wedding and trip that he would see me in Detroit every now and then. He lived in Alabama, but he informed me he was also from Detroit and had relatives there, though the prospect of seeing him again seemed appealing. I knew I wouldn't be able to restrain myself. I had seen enough to realize I couldn't act the same way with him as I did in Alabama. I didn't want to air my dirty laundry and reveal my unfaithful habits. I also did not want Derek to find out that I was married with children. It became my filthy little secret to keep my AP and husband apart, and I never abandoned the meat, but karma evidently didn't like me because they did meet, and it resulted in fractured bones. However, there was a history prior to the conflict, so now I'll tell you how my husband went from not realizing I was cheating to beating Derek up. It takes a blind person not to notice a change in their spouse's aura and movements. Nathan is not blind, and when he returned from Alabama, he watched me like a hawk watching a chick in life. I've realized that the people with the most to hide are usually the ones that do their hardest to act normal. That is exactly what happened to me. I try too hard to act as if everything is fine, and that's how I gave Nathan reason to suspect it was difficult for me, since I had cheated on Nathan for the first time since we were married. In truth, I had cheated for the first time in any of my relationships, including with my ex-partners. I had always been loyal to my previous relationships that did not even lead to marriage, so after cheating in my marriage, it was nearly impossible to breathe in the same room as my husband. Derek is not as who can be manipulated and softened. Derek is a man full of confidence and insight. First and foremost, he nursed a grudge against me. The fact that I went for Alabama without taking our daughter as he advised, and that I departed before he woke up bothered him greatly. He thought that I had disrespected him in some way. When I returned, there was a lot to take in. Since Derek was not having it, he questioned me about leaving the manner I did, and I chose to be defensive. I didn't want him to realize he was correct and that I had disrespected him in the worst way during our marriage. Derek refused to believe what I said, claiming that I had something to hide. According to him, the way I left was suspicious, and sneaking out like that only meant I had other intentions, and I knew I'd rather wear a jean jacket than admit I cheated on him, or even had plans to cheat on him. I decided to gaslight him and then act casually about it. I simply couldn't tell him the truth, because I knew he'd kick me out without waiting for an explanation. I knew Derek would never forgive me if he discovered I cheated. He has no tolerance for adultery or infidelity. These are topics we discussed before we married, so I knew I couldn't get away with it, no matter what I said. That's why I opted to keep it cool and hope you forget about it. I returned to my tasks and resumed my role as a housewife. My connection with Nathan remained strained because I could tell he still had his concerns, but I tried not to overreact and instead gave it some time. After a few weeks, we felt like we'd returned to our old selves. I forgot about Derek and went back to my daily life, but this was only the beginning. 4 months after the Alabama incident, Derek contacted me again and said he was in Detroit. Yes, he did tell me that to say I was stunned would be an understatement. I didn't expect to see him again. So imagine how I felt when he told me that I really didn't know how to process that knowledge, which was a mix of emotions. 7 knew that not a single part of me was excited. There was nothing to be enthusiastic about, because I knew Derek was a troublemaker who would expose us. I wasn't mistaken. Shortly after discovering that he was in Detroit, he began asking to meet me. He persisted so much that I eventually agreed to visit him. I knew he wouldn't give up, so it was best to meet him. A part of me wanted to see him again, while knowing it was a poor idea. So we met for lunch and, as I expected, Derek was in trouble. This dude wore almost no clothes to lunch, and was constantly touching me. Compared to how calm I was when he did the same thing in Alabama, I was terrified when he did it in Detroit. I mean, we were literally in the same city as my husband. I had to be cautious about what I did, because it was dangerous, but I also had to appear normal, or Derek would suspect something. I have to admit that was the most awkward meal I've ever had. I had to keep my eyes open and look around to make sure no one I recognized was gazing at us, but that man named Derek was impatient, and he didn't care that we were in public. After lunch I had to rush back home to prepare dinner for Nathaniel. I also had to pick up the kids from school, which made it difficult to meet together for lunch. Even though I rushed, I wasn't able to finish things on time, and Nathan is unable to return home. He questioned if I had gone out as soon as he started the assignment. I was astonished by his query, because I had not told him I was going out that day, so I was not sure how he found out. He was furious and demanded to know why I had left the kids in school for almost an hour before picking them up. That is how I was bursted, guys. I was unable to pick up the children on time since I went to grab food for dinner. I knew the teachers were going to call one of us, but I never expected them to call Nathan without first calling me. When I didn't receive a call, I assumed they never called anyone. So I was shocked when Nathan asked me so many questions. I was able to get out of that debate by blaming the grocery store for being too slow to process my payment. It was a terrible reason, but I did help Nathan shut up a little. My mistake was underestimating Nathan's intelligence and assuming that everything ended with his queries. I had no idea he'd seek the truth and get the answers he was seeking for. Just like the dev, Derek invited me out a second time, this time for dinner. I attempted to say no, since I didn't want to be caught. But Derek was as pushy as always and refused to accept no for an answer. I had to be careful, because walking out at night without being observed was nearly impossible. It took me a long time to work up the guts to go out on that particular night. I had to wait for the kids to go to sleep before waiting for. Nathan always slept early because he had to get up early for work, so it was easy to wait for him. After he fell asleep, I dashed out to meet Derek. Derek decided to book a motel for the two of us. I told him I couldn't sleep at the hotel, but he asked me to remain. When I met Derek, it was as if I had lost all of my brain cells and many of my reasoning abilities. I start acting irrationally and doing stupid things. That is exactly what occurred on that specific night. I casually ate supper with him, flirted with him, and kissed him numerous times in public. I believe I let down my guard that night because I assumed no one I knew would be out late. It also gave me comfort of mind, knowing Nathan had gone asleep. I slept at the motel with Derek and returned home the following morning. When I returned, I nearly fainted from the sight that greeted me. What I witnessed was every woman's nightmare. No lady wishes to see her boxers outside of her marital home. It is a horrifying sight, but that was the image that greeted me. My heart began to race because for someone who had left her boyfriend's hotel room, seeing her belongings outside her marital suite was unsettling. However, I had to brace myself and go in. When I entered the house, I was greeted by his parents in the living room along with my own parents. It all came as a shock to me because I had no idea what was going on. When I questioned him, he showed me a video showing me kissing Derek at the hotel restaurant the night before. I was speechless and had nothing to say, till our parents spoke to us about where to keep the children. It all happened so quickly, and my mother grabbed my hair and hauled me from the door. Even while my parents scolded me and expressed their disappointment, I couldn't say anything, since I couldn't believe I'd been caught, despite being so careful. Nathan apparently followed me after noticing I had left the house. It didn't help that he'd already questioned my movements. The next day, I called Derek and told him the truth about my marriage, including my husband pushing me out of the house. I'll end here. For now I have to charge my smartphone and accompany my folks to Big Nathan. I will provide an update soon. Update. Hello, folks. I'll resume from where I left off now. So when Derek found out what Nathan had done, he became quite enraged. He was upset. I didn't tell him about my marriage, but he said it didn't matter because he was also in a relationship. I asked if I might stay with him in Alabama, but he refused. He told me that he wants to confront Nathan and obtain answers from him. I knew it was a horrible idea right away, but it turned out to be the worst of my life. I was stunned that he did not change his mind. He made me drive him to Nathan's place. Nathan opened the door after repeatedly pounding. When he saw me with Derek, he knew exactly what the visit was about. Derek tried to act like an alpha by raising his voice and asking Nathan why he threw me out of the house. "How dare you send your children's mother out of the house like that?" he asked Nathan. I even grimaced at his words, since I understood how bizarre the entire thing was. Nathan attempted to close the door in our faces, but Derek held it open and said, "I'm going to ask you a question." The next thing I saw was Nathan grabbing Derek's shoulder and kicking him in the stomach before taking his hands and pounding his face. It all happened so quickly that if it hadn't been for Derek's loud sobbing and flinching, I would have had no idea what had happened. Nathan continued to kick and punch Derek, despite Derek's struggle and resistance. It was evident that Nathan's rage outweighed Derek's power. I didn't interfere until I noticed blood streaming from Derek's knee. I had to run between them and try to defuse the situation, but it simply landed me on the floor. Nathan didn't care. He simply shoved me off. I had to run out of the fence to get a man to stop. Derek was so hurt that he couldn't walk or stand properly, so I called an ambulance. I couldn't believe I was driving my AP to the hospital in an ambulance after my husband beat him up. Being beaten up was horrible for Derek, but he deserved it. He wanted to avoid the obligation of caring for me, but I still went out in public and was pushed to the ground. The worst thing was that Derek forced me to pay his hospital bills and blamed me for his injuries. He even blocked my phone number in front of me and told me not to contact him again. He claimed I was wanting his life and had fixed him up with my spouse. He blackmailed me into paying his debts, or he would charge both me and my husband. I had to pay the bills because I did not want any problems. Do you recall in the last update, when I stated I was going to beg Nathan with my parents? It did not end nicely. Nathan has filed for divorce and isn't ready to forgive me. I am getting a divorce, guys. He even informed my parents about the decision I made to bring my AP to his home. I hadn't told my parents about it, so it didn't assist my cause at all. They were so disappointed that they asked me to leave. I spent all of my savings to cover Derek's medical bills. Therefore I'm broke. To make matters worse, Derek has ignored me. I can't even walk with my head held high because others noticed me sprinting around during the day. Nathan pummeled Derek mercilessly. I am living in humiliation and have very little money, and now I am going through a divorce and custody struggle. All of this has taken its toll on me and I'm completely fatigued. Nathan investigated every possible avenue, and he has refused to pay me child support. Because he wants full custody of our children. He's trying to prove in court that I abandoned them in school to go on dates, as well as for a week to attend a wedding. I believe he will win this battle with his experienced lawyers. Has he not done enough for me? All of this is taking its toll on me psychologically, emotionally and financially. I am practically doomed. Here is the next story. I suppose I should have been more wary the first time my wife returned home from her job at the art gallery, ecstatic about a new patron. However, when you fully trust someone, especially after 17 worry-free years together, your tendency is to give them the benefit of the doubt. My instinct, however, was completely wrong. I am Ethan Walker and Rebecca is my wife. We met at a tiny Midwestern university 18 years ago, began dating 17 years ago, and were married 16 years ago. Our family expanded with the births of our daughter 14 years ago, and our son 12 years ago. I work as a computer programmer for a government organization, getting a decent but not very high wage. Rebecca was content to be a stay-at-home parent while our children were young. She opted to return to work 2 years ago, feeling that her children were of legal age. She landed a 30-hour-per-week position at an elite art gallery in town. This fit her perfectly. Rebecca was an art major in college, so she was already familiar with the world of art. The gallery drew customers with larger budgets than ours. We reside in a large Midwestern city, so there were plenty of affluent patrons to keep the gallery running. Rebecca's position allowed her to interact with these affluent people, getting a taste of their lifestyle before returning to her more modest reality. Occasionally, I accompany her to gallery events as her plus one. It was an exciting experience, rubbing elbows with executives, politicians, attorneys and bank presidents far from the normal firm. A computer nerd like me keeps Rebecca coming home humming with stories of meeting some famous or prominent person. Our children and I would watch as she appeared to glide through the home temporarily lifted by her enchantment. She eventually returns to reality in our life. Unfortunately, Rebecca did not manage the shift graciously. The kids would frequently withdraw to their rooms, leaving me to bear the brunt of her caustic remarks about our lives for the remainder of the evening. Most of the time, I was able to handle it calmly. When it began to wear on me, I'd go to the garage and work on my automobile. Rebecca had been talking about a new patron at the gallery for weeks, James Smith, a 28-year-old millionaire, who had recently moved into a luxurious new home, and was looking for art that fit his expensive lifestyle. Rebecca was generally impressed by him. However, she did notice that he seemed rather taken with himself. She regularly mentioned his handsomeness and well-dressed appearance, as well as his varied physical activities, such as bicycle and rock climbing. Rebecca's excitement at a new customer was not unusual, so I didn't think much of it. I let her talk about him for the following few weeks. Her excitement eventually faded, as I expected, and I didn't hear anything further about James Smith until I met him at the gallery's Christmas banquet a few weeks before the holidays. I must confess that he was an amazing sight, standing around 6 feet 2 inches, weighing 190 pounds and looking substantial in an expensive Armani suit. His blonde hair, blue eyes and outstanding good looks piqued my interest. Despite my initial reservations, I wasn't quite prepared for that. Our chat lasted only around 30 seconds while Rebecca introduced us, but I saw him right away. I surveyed my wife from head to toe, just like a predator would with its prey. Rebecca looked lovely that night, with a blue-fitted skirt and blazer with a hint of cleavage coming through her white blouse. However, his expression was more leer than admiration. Rebecca was too interested with the gala to notice, but I did, and Rebecca left to socialize. I went to the bar. I poured myself a shot of Jack Ethan's over ice and quickly found David Brown, Rebecca's co-worker's husband. We had previously met and gotten along well, frequently connecting over our mutual interests in sports and cars. David and I talked for a while before I started mingling myself. About an hour later, I observed Rebecca among a small group of people, with James Smith almost draped over her. I chose to intervene. I got Rebecca's customary drink, a Riesling, from the bar, and approached them introducing myself. I gave Rebecca her glass of wine. Then, swiftly but firmly, I pulled James's hand from Rebecca's right hip, where it had fallen after wrapping around her back. He simply worked at me as he removed his hand. I stayed with the group for a few minutes, but Rebecca soon left to chat with additional people, while I went in a separate direction, making sure James wasn't following her. I proceeded to mingle, expecting to encounter Rebecca among her co-workers. However, after an hour, I realized I had not seen her anywhere. I took a quick look around and realized James was also missing. Alarm bells rang in my head, so I made it a priority to find Rebecca. I went outside and circled the building after I couldn't find her in the gallery. I noticed groupings of people in the parking lot, as if they were about to depart, but there was no trace of Rebecca. Then I observed a black Jaguar, with a couple seated quite intimately in the rear seat. The automobile was running and they were sitting close together. I trusted my intuition, and assumed it was Rebecca and James. I approached the car and opened the door next to the woman. Both occupants jumped at the intrusion, and while I couldn't tell if they were kissing, they were very close time to depart. "Sweetheart." For the time being, I maintained the firmest, most polite tone possible. "We were just," Rebecca stammered, and James smirked at me. "I do not care. It is time to leave." I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Really, Ethan, you should come in and listen to this sound system." James joined in. "It's absolutely evident." The car audio played soft concert music, but neither of them seemed to be paying attention to it another time. "James, we really need to go." I responded non-committal. I helped Rebecca get out of the car, and we started walking toward my Ford F-150. "Wait, I can't leave yet. The celebration has another 2 hours. I meant to stay and help host." Rebecca insisted anxiously. "If your manager has a concern, please contact me personally." I spoke angrily. "What were your thoughts?" We were actually just listening to his car's music system. It's incredible. She insisted, her voice still clear. Oh, I replied dryly and unimpressed. Despite Rebecca's allegations, we maintained a cold demeanor for several weeks. Eventually I let it go and everything returned to normal. So it took me by surprise when Rebecca informed a few months later that she had accepted an invitation to James's lake cabin for the 4th of July weekend. The guest list comprised us, Rebecca's boss and his wife, and 2 other married couples who were James's pals. We were meant to arrive on Friday afternoon and remain until midday Sunday, with James hosting the entire weekend, which included grilling, a full bar, swimming boats and other amenities. I began to disagree, but Rebecca cut me off before I could express my concerns, stating that we were leaving and then walking away. The weekend actually began off well. We spent several hours on James's large yacht enjoying the lake. The women looked lovely in their bikinis, while the men managed to pull off the baggy swim trunks look, to be honest. James definitely had the greatest physique among us, but happily he didn't appear to be any better in town than the others. Rebecca, while being the second oldest of the 5 ladies, stood out in her black bikini, which highlighted her 36C bust and shapely physique without being too revealing. James's backyard at the cottage was immaculately set up with a high-quality barbecue, and a fridge stocked with beer, wine and ice for mixing drinks. He marinated a batch of steaks and deftly managed the grill, while the rest of us relaxed nearby with drinks in hand. James was the ideal host and he kept his distance from Rebecca, who similarly kept a respectful distance compared to how they interacted around Christmas. The first night went well and we all retired to our rooms at midnight, with James being the only single person who went to the master bedroom alone. Saturday began with a visit to the gorgeous tiny tourist town on the lake, complete with cute shops. The women returned with various things, and were evidently enjoying themselves. A full meal of hero sandwiches followed and an impromptu volleyball game erupted after the game. The drinking began and that night's grilled featured sausages and shredded pork. We had another excellent supper, and spent a few hours speaking later that evening. Rebecca's supervisor, Sean, offered a walk around the lake, which I consented to after all we had consumed. We decided to go for a 30-minute walk. My mood sank as we returned. Rebecca was resting in a chair leaning on James, who had his hands around her waist. As John and I arrived, Rebecca smiled and stood up, albeit not quickly. Clearly aware of my emotions, she avoided eye contact and sat in the chair next to me for the most of the evening. Despite her apparent attempts to appear innocent, I noticed Rebecca and James exchanging furtive glances throughout the night. The celebration started to wind down around midnight, believing they had gone unnoticed. Like the night before, the other 3 couples went to their different bedrooms, but Rebecca softly invited me to join her in the kitchen for the first time that evening. She looked me right in the eyes and declared James invited me to sleep in his bed tonight, and I accepted his offer. I must have passed out or something. I couldn't believe what I heard. Rebecca just told me that she was going to spend the night with James. I looked at her in surprise, questioning whether I had understood right. This is not about love. She clarified. I have been entirely faithful to you for 17 years and you are the one man I love, but tonight I want to be with James. He thrills me and I want to know how it feels to be with a different man after tonight. I swear to return to being your dedicated wife for the rest of our lives, but I think you owe me this. One night I stood there astonished and speechless, attempting to digest her remarks. My wife told me she wanted to sleep with another man, because she believed she earned it and I owed her over my dead body. Are you planning to sleep with him? I eventually managed to say this is not negotiable, Ethan. She answered forcefully. Accept it as it is. Tonight, tomorrow and for the rest of my life I will be yours. Don't be so sure about that, babe. I said fiercely, remember that there are consequences to every action. God damn it, Ethan. She hissed. Do you have to see everything as black and white? It's only one night. For God's sake, one night done, you're going to destroy it for everyone. Only one night. We didn't expect you to be that stubborn. I probably should have kept my mouth shut and hidden behind your back, but I was worried that if you found out it would mean the end of our relationship. So I assumed that if you knew and let me go, it wouldn't be cheating with that. She turned on her heel and walked away. As I emerged from the kitchen and entered the living area, I noticed Rebecca take James's hand and lead him to the master bedroom. My eyesight blurred, most likely due to tears welling up in my eyes. I went to the indoor bar and poured myself a shot of Jack Ethan's. It took me approximately 5 minutes to finish, and after I finished I softly approached the master bedroom door. The unmistakable sounds of two individuals making love came from within. In that instant I realized my life, as I knew it had ended. I gulped several more shots of Jack, frantic to figure out my next move. My first thought was to leave and get a divorce right soon, but the thought of being separated from my children for the most of the time was intolerable. I couldn't see how that decision would help either me or them. However, the fact that my wife was in another man's bed at that particular moment was something I couldn't accept for a tiny moment. I considered burning down the house, but sanity triumphed. I must have passed out, because when I looked at my watch, it was 3:00 a.m. The entire home was oddly quiet. I stumbled into Rebecca's and my designated bedroom. The bed was still beautifully made, because it hadn't been slept on as I thought. I collapsed on top of the cover and tried to sleep, but I felt restless. By 7:30 a.m., I had dragged myself out of bed, taken a brief shower and brushed my teeth before coming into the kitchen. The other three couples were already up having bacon and eggs for breakfast. Emily, Rebecca's boss, John's wife, seemed to be the chief cook, and served me a plate, while the others mumbled their good mornings. The sideways glances and pitying looks indicated that everyone was aware of what had occurred. My face burned with humiliation, as realized I was the object of their unsaid pity. Emily remarked sympathetically, "It's okay, Ethan. We've all seen this before." The others nodded in accord. James has done this 3 or 4 times before. He is an alpha dude. When he sees something he wants, he goes for it. He's just wired that way. I also believe he enjoys the humiliation part of it. John explained, but I do not think it is personal. It's simply his nature. So what happened to the other couples he has done this to? I asked. Emily said, "As far as I know they are all still married. It's stupid to end a long-term marriage over one night. Consider this, especially if children are involved." Ashley, one of the other wives, joined in. "Do you mean he specifically seeks married women with children in order to use their children as leverage in the affair?" I asked incredulously. "It appears to be that way." Ashley's husband, Christopher, spoke up, "But honestly, he's a fantastic man. Aside from that one quirk. I've known him since college, and once you become his friend, you have a friend for life, so I can overlook the fault. Furthermore, it does not appear to have any long-term negative consequences for couples. For example, James assisted his last affair and her husband in obtaining an excellent price on a condo in North Carolina. He now stays with them whenever he is in the region." Just then we heard moans coming from the main bedroom. It was Rebecca, and the sounds indicated that her night with James had lasted into the morning. Everyone at the table became scarlet with humiliation, and I felt an icy rage rise within me. "Why not finish our meal on the deck?" Emily proposed. Rebecca and James joined us on the terrace approximately 30 minutes later, looking freshly showered and pleased with themselves. I have to admit Rebecca was practically glowing and didn't appear to be ashamed of the situation. Carrying a plate of food, she approached the chase, where I was seated and perched on the edge while I adjusted my feet to make place for her back was to me, and I saw the pink tone of her skin above her tank top. There was also a visible bite mark on her right shoulder, just behind the strap of her tank and bra. She greeted me with a nod and I saw no reason to interrupt the silence. "So what are your plans for this afternoon?" James inquired in a pleasant host-like manner. "I think we should go back and spend some time with the kids this afternoon." "Honey," I replied, addressing Rebecca's back. She paused for a time and I could tell by the slight movement of her hair that she was rolling her eyes at me, one of those natural cues you pick up after spending so much time together and sitting across from everyone else. Her eye roll was on full display, and it took all of my willpower not to reach over and slap the back of her adulterous skull. "I was thinking we could remain a little longer, and perhaps go sailing again, dear." She replied bluntly, "Nope, we need to get back." "You finished your breakfast?" "I'll have the car. We is moving in 15 minutes. I replied as I walked inside. When I got back to the deck, I quickly packed the car. Rebecca had just finished her breakfast. I grabbed her wrist, gave a short wave, hurriedly said farewell to everyone and virtually dragged her to the car. I didn't need to look at anyone's faces to discern their emotions. I already knew because I was having the same thoughts for the first 45 minutes of the drive. The only sound was the radio playing gently. Rebecca primarily gazed out the passenger window, probably avoiding eye contact to avoid an outburst. She must have realized that meeting my eyes would result in an unavoidable clash. Finally, I couldn't keep it in anymore. "Was it worthwhile?" I half hissed and half spoke. She paused for a bit before taking a big breath and turning to face me. "Mom?" "Yes, it was fantastic." She maintained a detached expression in her gaze. That wasn't the response I was expecting. I was unsure what to expect. Maybe some stammering, a half-truth and a lot of backpedaling, perhaps an apology, but not the simple unadorned truth. Her expression proved this. She was not lying. 17 years, 2 children, we constructed everything together undone. In one night, I asked. She turned closer to me, her expression a mix of despair and resignation. "That's up to you, Ethan." She said, "I promised this would be a one-time affair, and now I'll be as loyal as I was before last night. It was a fantastic night, and now it is done. But if you can lose your love for me so soon and are willing to split up our family, then do what you have to do. Just remember, I'll get the kids and let them know. You've damaged our family." I was stunned into silence without even an apology, and she was prepared to blame me for our family's dissolution. She and James must have planned everything precisely. I'd never seen this side of Rebecca before and I didn't like it, so I may presume that this morning's interaction with James was a deliberate attempt to embarrass me. I asked not exactly he wanted one more time before I resumed. Being my husband's devoted wife, he's willing to follow my guidelines. We stopped by the in-laws to pick up Rebecca's children. It seemed like nothing had changed. Despite my positive relationship with her parents, Richard and Elizabeth, I could hardly face them. It felt like they knew Rebecca had betrayed me, and I was overcome with shame and humiliation. I want to scream the truth about their daughter, but I realized it was not the time or place. Rebecca had a puzzled expression the entire time. We were there, clearly enjoying my suffering and having the upper hand. This was clearly not the way to make amends. I thought about it. Afterward, Rebecca went into bed after me. I was facing away from her. When she climbed inside and spooned behind me, I felt her hand caress my body. After she tried to arouse me twice, I turned to face her and gently shook my head. "Not tonight." I said, "There is nothing you can do to get me off. You'll have to be pleased with what James gave you last night, and Rebecca showed weakness this morning." For the first time since Saturday night, she appeared offended and surprised by my refusal of her advances. This was one of the few occasions we'd ever done this, but don't you want to claim me for yourself? According to James, it is virtually an instinctual response for guys in situations like this. Her voice was incredulous. Oh, did he now? So, he's not only a real estate expert, but also a psychotherapist. He should have informed you that some men do not regard what you did as a challenge. Some of us consider it a complete betrayal. Rebecca's eyes widened with shock. In our 17 years together, I had never spoken to her in this manner, and I had never cursed at her before she withdrew her fingers. As I rolled onto my back and feigned to fall asleep, I could hear her crying silently, like if she didn't care. I set up an appointment with a reputed divorce attorney for the following week. To put it mildly, the meeting went poorly. Joshua Martin had to explain to me twice that my options were either to give up half of my assets and partial custody of my children, or to stick it out for their sake while losing half of my assets. If we divorced once, they would be of legal age. We've all witnessed parents who sacrifice everything for their children only to discover that they share little in common when the children leave home. It leads to divorce. That was the scenario spelled out by my attorney. Be a super parent for the following 6 years. Then divorce Rebecca. As soon as the children were no longer an issue, at least in my case, I didn't have to be concerned about Rebecca running around, provided she maintained her pledge. So that is what I did. If my children were participating in an activity, I usually took the initiative and ensured Rebecca was as well. There was no reason why I should be the only one going through a stamp club fundraiser or working on a fourth woodworking project. We became the parents that everyone admired, but also pied. I did not touch Rebecca sexually for 6 months. She eventually told me that if I didn't meet my husband's responsibilities, she would have to go elsewhere. Since I was on the verge of death, I rationalized that I could only be with Rebecca in the same physical way she had been with James. After all, she was still an attractive woman. It wasn't as if I was compelled to be intimate with someone unappealing. Our first night back in the saddle was not pleasant, but it set the tone for the following several years. We had a date night at one of our favorite Italian restaurants, and I made sure Rebecca had a few more glasses of wine than normal. She was a little more randy than usual, and when I proposed we go to bed while the kids watched a movie, she didn't hesitate. Like two horny teens, we stripped down rapidly. After a quick kiss, I forced her into the bed. Then she moaned, and not just any moan, but the one we'd all heard at the lake cottage on that fateful Sunday morning. Caught up in long-forgotten feelings, we carried out our marital duty with an intensity that overpowered us. We laid together for another 10 minutes before disengaging. Where the hell did that come from? She stage whispered holy *T. Ethan, will I have to wait another 6 months for a repeat performance? I couldn't respond, so I simply spooned into her back. Every time I thought about Rebecca and James, fury surged within me, leaving no place for tenderness in her love-making. Nonetheless, she appeared to love it and never complained, though we rarely snuggled or talked softly afterward, as had been our habit before to the tragedy. Life returned to what I imagined would be our new normal. Every month, I hired a private investigator to make sure Rebecca kept her promise about not seeing James or anybody else. It cost a lot, but it gave me some peace of mind. Liam, our youngest child, went to college at Michigan State 6 years later. Emily was already a junior at Michigan, sparking a summer-long sibling rivalry after Liam decided to stay in a dorm as a freshman. Rebecca and I assisted him in moving in a week before classes began. Neither of us recalled meeting half of the items Liam had packed. We drove Liam up to Michigan State on a Thursday and spent the weekend, leaving late on Sunday, exactly 30 days later. On a Tuesday afternoon, I called both kids and explained them calmly and quietly that I was going to force their mother because she had cheated on me some years before. They both felt devastated. I thought you two were so good together. How does this happen? Emily nearly shouted into the phone. I felt we were fantastic together too, I said, But your mother had cheated on me with James Smith 6 years ago, on a 4th of July weekend, with numerous other couples. She informed me up front that she was going to do it so she wouldn't have to skulk around. She pledged to be faithful. Afterward, she didn't think it was cheating, but I did. I warned her that there would be consequences if she went ahead with it. Apparently she and James had planned everything, and she threatened that if I left, she would take half of our assets and turn you both against me. I couldn't risk losing you both, so I put up with it until you were both old enough. Liam was the first to reply. I will be damned. Did she offer you a reason for withdrawing this? Not really, I replied. She knew I'd give in to prevent losing you two to a point. She was correct, Dad. Is she still dating someone? Emily asked. Not as far as I know. Baby, I had a pie. Since then, I've been trailing her for 1 week every month, and she appears to have kept her word. So why can't you forgive her? Father. Liam asked tentatively. You have been married for what, 22 years? She just did it once. I struggled to keep my wrath under control, saying that once was enough. What type of love did she show me while she slept in another man's bed? What type of regard did she have for me when they left the next morning? It was all we could hear. I am sorry, kids, I just don't have the heart to forgive her. I stayed with her to keep our family together. I love you both. Thank you, Dad. We appreciate how you kept things together for us. Emily replied. Does she already know? And at best check no. In a few minutes, she will be served at 400 in her office. Oh, Dad, Emily remarked to her supervisor and co-workers. Bad move. She will be devastated and humiliated. Please do not do this to her father. It is too late, sweetie. Furthermore, I arranged it this way on purpose. Her boss and his wife were present at the lake house when this occurred. If you think I wasn't humiliated enough, consider how I felt the next morning when your mother began moaning with James. I simply wanted to disappear. So sure, I want her to feel the same sense of humiliation. Well, Dad, I disagree with this. Emily responded. I guess I understand it. I'm with you. Father, Liam said. I've got your back completely. My cell phone rings at 407. Yes, I responded. I am on my way home now, you bastard. When I get there, I'll kick your balls all the way till next week. Rebecca yelled into her phone. My money was on contract, as were the crying shows. I know, I responded. Before hanging up the phone, I sat in the family room watching ESPN and waiting. When I heard the garage door open and Rebecca's car pull up, I turned off the television and rose up, prepared to defend myself if necessary. I'd never hit a woman before, but I was ready if needed. Rebecca, as usual, entered the utility room enraged. She marched right up to me, so I adjusted slightly to my right to keep her dominant right foot from delivering a kick in my groin, a traditional fighter's trick. I also lifted both fists in a protective posture. She came to a halt, appeared to size me up, as if calculating how to strike me, and then collapsed onto the sofa in sobs. I thought we were fine. I honestly thought we were fine. She mumbled. You have never addressed divorce in all these years. You assumed we were terrific simply because you were. I responded calmly, yet honored my word to you. I haven't slept with anyone since my night with James at the lake. I wasn't going to betray you again. You kept your commitment, but you betrayed a promise you made to me 16 years ago. When you did it, I told you not to follow through, but you threatened to take the children from me. I couldn't stand by and let it happen, and you had me served in the gallery in front of John and all of my co-workers. Could you be crueler? She rasped. Having John there completes the cycle you began at the Larkey house 6 years ago regarding cruelty. That Sunday morning was the most humiliating experience of my life. Rebecca continued to sob, but there was a gleam of recognition in her eyes. 6 years ago you informed me that sleeping with James was worthwhile. That was fantastic. I still feel this way, but I maintained my commitment. I've been completely faithful for over 6 years. She whined. So what is the expiration date on a promise from you? I fired back. If your vow meant nothing after 16 years. Is your promise only valid for half of that, say 8 years? Ethan. I sincerely apologize if that one incident leads to divorce, but I confess to you I did not cheat. Yes, I insisted, just because you notified me about it ahead of time rather than sneaking around does not make it right. We did not discuss it. Did you make the decision with him? We did not consent to it. You and he did. You breached your promise to me. You're sad for the divorce it's creating, but not the act itself. You've never apologized for the ACT. I did not give you a hall pass. We did not consent to any arrangement. You simply made a decision and asked me to accept it. You ripped my heart out that weekend, Rebecca, and on the way home you told me it was my problem, and I needed to get over it. Or you take the children away. Does this sound like love to you? Because it certainly doesn't for me. She simply gazed at me shocked. Rebecca hired a skilled lawyer, who persuaded the judge that we needed couple counseling during our first session. The counselor, a young and attractive woman, around 30, asked why I couldn't get over Rebecca cheating on me once, especially because she hadn't gone behind my back and slept with James. I glanced at her as if she had two heads before asking if she had ever been married. I saw she wasn't wearing any rings on her left hand. My marital status has nothing to do with your response, Mr. Walker. She said defensively. That is absolutely the wrong answer. I remarked this while standing up to depart. Both women sat motionless as I left the room. Later that night I received a call from Rebecca's parents, Richard and Elizabeth. They have my heart. My own parents died several years ago, and I've become even closer to Richard and Elizabeth since then. They accepted my affection totally. I realized they would have to support their daughter. That's just what parents do. I hadn't spoken to them since Rebecca was served with divorce papers 3 weeks ago. They were each on speakerphone. After exchanging niceties, Elizabeth began the chat. Ethan, why are you being a hard ass about this? She asked. Rebecca loves you with her whole heart, and has maintained her vow since that moment. Why do you have to be so stubborn? What did she tell you about the weekend? I asked. Well, honey, she informed us that you two discussed her sleeping with a guy for one night, and that she swore to remain devoted to you forever after she stated she told you right away, rather than lurking around, since she adores you and does not want to lose you. That is only half the tale. Mom, are you both sitting down? Say anything. You need to say. Ethan, we're seated. Her father replied curtly. We did not discuss it. She and James did. I was informed. I was told that I had no say in what was going on, whether I liked it or not, and that if I made a scene, she would gather the kids and turn them against me. I warned her not to do it, but it didn't make any difference. So they had their fun that night, and to embarrass me even more, they had another round the next morning, with the rest of us originally sitting in the living room until your daughter became too loud, forcing us to move outside to the backyard. I've never felt more humiliated in my life. When we arrived home, Rebecca informed me how lovely their vacation had been. Does this sound like a caring wife? Does it seem like someone who genuinely cares for her husband? It certainly doesn't for me, but you stayed with her for another 6 years. Her father asked. No, I stayed for my kids, but the love it began to die that night and deteriorated slightly each day after. I'll never love her the way I once did. I overheard Elizabeth sobbing. We are sorry, son. We didn't know the whole story. Richard explained. We should have known it had to be worse for you to simply walk away. Thank you for staying with Rebecca and her lawyer for so many years on behalf of the children. Trying every strategy to postpone the divorce took nearly a year. Maybe Rebecca assumed I would lose the desire to fight and instead stay married. She should have realized that was not going to happen, although I didn't understand it at the time. Being an attentive parent, as my children grew up, helped me maintain a high social status and provided insight into the personal lives of other parents. I met a lot more divorcees in my age group than I would have otherwise, and I used that information to my advantage when my divorce became official. On weekends, I went on day trips to restaurants and to dance clubs and was virtually always accompanied by an amusing partner. Many of my children's mothers were divorced. Others were pals of friends. The old adage that everything is out there if you're willing to look for it was proven correct. I made love more frequently and with more partners than I did before becoming married. Life wasn't that horrible. If I ignored the hole Rebecca had left in my heart. After the divorce, I moved into a 3-bedroom condo so my children could stay with me anytime they wanted. I knew they were furious with Rebecca after the divorce, but I hoped they'd ultimately get over it and share their time with us until they moved out permanently for their sake. I hoped they and Rebecca could reach an arrangement, but I wasn't going to be the one to broker it. Rebecca had harmed all 3 of us, and I wasn't going to bring her back into the kids' lives. While it didn't surprise me that both kids decided to live with me during their college breaks, it did surprise me how quickly Rebecca's parents returned during the divorce process. I had not heard much from them, which made sense. Approximately 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Elizabeth called to invite me to supper at a good Italian restaurant in our city. Given how well we had gotten along prior to the divorce, I saw no need to decline, and the evening turned out to be wonderful. The night began awkwardly, with Richard and Elizabeth apologizing for Rebecca's conduct and any hostility that had emerged as a result of their support for her, at least until they got the complete story. I told them that their apologies were accepted and that I understood their desire to assist their daughter. I then recommended we shift the subject, and the evening got better from there, despite occasional comments and tears about what may have been reuniting with. Richard and Elizabeth restored a feeling of normalcy in my life, and I believe they treasured my company as much as I did theirs. We rarely discussed Rebecca, except when reminiscing about old incidents. We began meeting a few times a month while the kids were away at school, and even more regularly when they returned home. It was just a matter of time until I brought a new individual to our group. I started seeing Sophia about 18 months after the divorce. I had been casually dating, not actively looking for Mrs. Right. When Sophia and her friends arrived into the restaurant where the kids and I were eating on Saturday night, she and her 3 friends were seated just a table away. My children noticed that I wasn't paying attention. "Hey, Dad, did you see the woman that just sat down?" Emily whispered. "They are all lovely, and 3 of them don't even have wedding bands." "Emily, I don't need you to play matchmaker," I replied, a little frustrated. "Dad, check correct." Liam commented, "There's some serious potential at that table." Curiosity got the best of me, so I peeked over. The youngsters were correct. "Well, I will be damned. Maybe I really need your help," I admitted to Emily with a smile. After supper, I gave a man the car keys and told the kids I'd get an Uber home. I immediately presented myself to the attractive ladies at the table, who urged me to join them right away. While they ate, I drank a shot of equal rare bourbon. "Did you really ditch your kids to flirt with us? What type of father does that?" I asked Olivia, the long-haired blonde sitting at my 10:00. "I'm a father who trusts his children good taste. When they pointed out that 3 of you were not wearing wedding bands, I had 2 options: go home to watch a baseball game or bear endless ridicule from my children, or come over here risk embarrassing myself in order to earn their respect. Furthermore, they've always taught me that it's just as easy to adore a good-looking stepmother as it is to dislike one. Wow, that is an intriguing approach. At 2 p.m., a big guy complimented the married brunette. It's not an approach, but rather a confident man with two clever, outspoken children who, I may add, have fantastic taste. So aren't you the leader here? The women busted out laughing. Even Chloe, the one I had chosen for that large gentleman. You get to tell your story first. She replied smiling. I gave them a simplified summary of my life, including my 17-year marriage and subsequent divorce. Romeo, you're not persuasive enough. How did your wife leave you if you are such a wonderful man? At 8:00, I asked Sophia, the raven-haired beauty. 3 of us here are divorced, so would like to know early on whether we are wasting our time. I smiled in appreciation for the directness. For the first time since my divorce 2 years ago, I shared my complete story, including the traumatic bits. Until then, the only people who knew the complete truth were Rebecca's parents and my divorce attorney. When I was done, the room lapsed into an uncomfortable stillness. Everyone had tears in their eyes and I could feel mine well up. Rachel remarked softly, caressing my right arm, for 400. I apologize, ladies, I normally try to avoid dwelling on the past. Look on the bright side. I got 2 wonderful children out of it, and my in-laws aren't bad either. Your in-laws? You're kidding, right? Sophia exclaimed. You're really pushing the boundaries of believability. Nobody likes their in-laws very much, especially after divorce. What shall I say? I'm unique. I noticed their plates were empty and added, if you, ladies, are finished eating, this round of drinks is on me. I would love to hear your stories. We ended up staying for 3 more rounds to share our stories. Olivia divorced her serial cheater, Sophia, and Rachel's marriages had ended owing to irreconcilable reasons. Chloe, on the other hand, had been happily married to the world's best husband for 26 years, a term she reiterated multiple times, to which the other 3 nodded in agreement. Meeting this man became a top goal for me. The women informed me that they had a monthly girls' night out, and my presence was breaking the rules for Chloe. However, Chloe said that if she could bring her husband to the next outing, I could join if I wished. The remaining 3 quickly agreed. Can I bring my date? I asked with a mischievous grin. A month later, we all reconnected at the same restaurant where I met Chloe's husband, William. By the end of the evening, I had concluded that he might be the world's best spouse. We hit it off immediately. Our monthly outings continued and I eventually built true friendships with the 3 single women. We used to hang out as a group of 4, but I occasionally went on dates with one of them. Some of these dates concluded with intense meetings. They were all fantastic in bed, and I always gave my best effort. I thoroughly appreciated it, and, judging by their enthusiastic answers, so did several of them. Sophia and I decided to become exclusive after approximately a year, although we remained close friends with Olivia and Rachel, but we all knew that exclusivity meant exactly that. Even so, the females' banter might be a little bold when they got together. It was all in good humor. However, sometimes it made me flush. My children quickly became comfortable around Sophia, but my in-laws took a little longer to warm up to her. I understood and didn't push the issue. A consistent relationship, for me, most like indicated to them that the limited chances of Rebecca and me reconciling were dwindling. However, given the great link I established with my in-laws, they gradually began to recognize Sophia's talents. It was only a matter of time before they began to feel comfortable around her and treated her with the same kindness they had shown me. After Sophia had spent roughly half a dozen visits with my in-laws, Elizabeth, my ex-mother-in-law, called me aside, appearing especially solemn. My pulse raced with fear of some urgent familial trauma. "Ethan, maybe I don't have the right to say this, but I'm doing it anyway. She began speaking in a forceful tone. How long have you been dating this woman? Don't you think it's time you put a ring on her finger before someone else has the same bright idea? I tried to remain calm, but I was screaming inside. When your ex-mother-in-law calls it out, it may be time to take action. You're correct, Mom. I have to lock this girl up. I suppose I've been a little gun-shy. I admitted do it soon, huge lug. She replied with a smile. 6 weeks later I took Sophia to Marciano's to celebrate her 47th birthday. I told her to dress for the occasion, and she appeared in a classic little black dress. Sophia maintained a great shape even when she wasn't pregnant, thanks in part to her dedication at the gym. Her dress was about 5 in above her knees and cut low in the front, highlighting her stunning 36's figure, and it took everything in me not to slobber at supper. We both ordered cheesecake for dessert and our waiter arrived with the train carrying 2 slices and a bottle of champagne. Sophia muttered perplexed. We didn't order the champagne. No, we did not. I did. I muttered back smiling. It is for toasting. Right after I placed this ring on your finger. After my conversation with Elizabeth, I had gone to my favorite jeweler to get a custom diamond engagement ring fashioned. He did an excellent job. When Sophia saw it, she fell into tears amid the ecstatic sobbing. I clearly heard a passionate yes. We chose a simple spring wedding. Liam served as my best man, while Chloe was Sophia's matron of honor. No, I did not invite Rebecca, even though I knew it bothered Richard with Elizabeth. I couldn't call my ex-wife a friend. Our encounters were limited to events involving children. While we kept polite relations during these occasions, unlike those who managed to form friendship after divorce, it was not in the cards for us. The wound of disrespect was too deep for me to fully forgive my children finally forgiven their mother, which was great with me, since she is their mother. We didn't talk about Rebecca, and my in-laws didn't mention her either. Sophia and Rebecca got along well at group events, which made me feel comfortable. Sophia was free to choose her own companions, and we didn't linger on it. We got together for important family events like Emily and Liam's weddings. As a proud father, nothing would detract from my children's special occasions. After a few years of marriage, their grandchildren began to come. I saw a sight of Sophia. I had not expected Rebecca, and I were thrilled to become grandparents, but Grandma Sophia was overjoyed. She had unsatisfied mother feelings, which the grandchildren eagerly tapped into. She transformed into a joyous, devoted grandma whose excitement was almost absurd. Rebecca remarried and divorced twice after me. Sophia once mentioned that Rebecca might have been looking for someone like me, but couldn't find him. She then urged me to pledge that I would never leave her. I said there's no need for me to promise that I made you a vow. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.